Warning, this content is disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Serious, what is something you witnessed that has completely horrified you? I was waiting for a train to get home one day when I saw a man talking on his mobile. He seemed to be really stressed and was almost on the verge of tears. I was with a friend at the time, and she pointed him out as well and cracked the joke that he was probably stressed about a university assignment that she was also doing because she was also badly freaking out about it. We keep talking for another 5 minutes when a train starts to shoot through and we see the man run up and throw himself into it. The train started braking straight after, and my friend and I are just standing there with our mouths open. I don't really know what happened to the man because my friend started to cry and freak out, so we walked away and caught an Uber back to my house to calm ourselves down. When I was 19, I saw my girlfriend get attacked by a huge dog, a Great Dane. All she did was knock on someone's door, and as they opened it, their dog just ran to the doorway, jumped up, and bit her in the face completely unprovoked. She screamed and turned to run away, and the dog kept biting her in the back until she managed to climb on top of a car. Her eyebrow was hanging from a fleshy string from where the dog's front teeth had scraped through her forehead. There was so much blood. At the hospital, they took nerves from her arm and transferred them to her face in the hopes that she'd be able to move her eyebrow again when it healed. I'm fucking terrified of dogs now. I was a paramedic, and we got called to a house. On the floor was a 7-year-old, laid out flat on his back on a blanket perfectly laid out. It looked fishy. The mother's boyfriend was there, and he said the kid hit his head in the shower, but the kid was dry. He wore a diaper for an incontinence problem, and that was dry. More fishiness. No cops were nearby to respond. The kid had a nasty head injury, and I stayed back to gather equipment while the ambulance crew transported the kid. The kid later died. The boyfriend would follow in his truck, but the windshield was icy. As he scraped the windshield, he confessed that he beat the kid's head in because he pissed himself. I was called as the lead witness for the prosecution at his trial. However, he pleaded to second-degree manslaughter before trial. He was later killed by other inmates in prison. When I was younger, 15 to 16, I was vacationing in the UP, Michigan, with my parents. On our drive back, we saw a car accident that included a couple cars, a car/boat trailer that jackknifed, and an overturned semi. I called 911, my dad, and I ran up to help while my mom stayed back with my younger sister. I remember running to one of the cars in the ditch that hit a tree, and the guy driving clearly smashed his head hard. No airbag deployment, but at least his seatbelt was on. Dude's face was bloody hamburger, it was so swollen. He was in a daze and was like, "WTF just happened?" Explained and wrapped my t-shirt around his head to stop bleeding as best I could. I told him to not move as he could have more serious injuries and it could exacerbate them. I had basic first aid training from when I worked as a lifeguard for those wondering how a kid knew this stuff. He agreed and just said help anyone else. My dad yelled, and the couple in the jackknifed car/boat trailer were hurt pretty badly. The passenger had her legs crushed/pinned from the dashboard, I guess pushed/rolled down over her legs. Couldn't get her out. Semi-dude was dead, ejected from his semi, as I am guessing no seatbelt. Was really fucked up seeing a red smear leading to his body where he had hit and then skidded down the road. My dad told me to stay away when he checked him and found no pulse. About this time the paramedics and fire department showed up to do their work, and we backed off and explained what we had seen happen and where people were, that we knew of. Luckily my car guy ended up being relatively okay, minus a bad headache and a broken nose and no idea on the car/boat couple. I still remember everything about that day, and I'm 33 now. Scariest thing I've ever experienced firsthand, but glad I at least was able to help, even if it wasn't very much. Still get a Christmas card every year from the car guy telling me how he and his family are doing. One day when I was 13 and walking home from school, around the corner I saw smoke in the sky, and I thought, hey, someone's house is on fire. I couldn't see what the smoke was from at this point yet because there was a building in the way. Then, when I actually got past the corner, I saw a lot of people from my school who had gathered at the footpath, and there was some obvious commotion. When I finally got into a spot where I could see from the people, I saw this lady in her front yard on fire. I am talking about her whole body from head to toe engulfed in flames, and she was just standing there screaming. Her husband was standing next to her, trying to hose her down. By trying, I mean the water coming out of his garden hose was about as much as my pee stream. I remember thinking, WTF? Turn the water up and make her roll on the grass. Eventually she fell to the ground and just lay there burning. After a while, I ran for hope because I was so shocked and terrified. The thing that stuck with me the most was that her son of about 5 was standing next to her, watching her this entire time. I am talking about like 5 meters away. For a long time afterwards, when I would walk past that house on my way to and from school, there was a black patch of grass where she fell and burned. I later found out her husband was cheating on her and mistreating her at home, and she bought some petrol and poured it over herself and struck a match. It made sense why he didn't really try to save her or seem devastated. He just stood there like he was watering a plant, so calm and so little water. She suffered third-degree burns to 90% of her body and died. About a week after the incident, there was a funeral, but that black patch of grass remained for almost 2 months. There have been a couple of things that have really stuck with me. The first was when I was young, and a friend of mine got hit by a car in front of school. Although he was fine in the end, with only a couple broken bones, I was still only 6 years old. It was pretty horrible. One thing happened this year that messed with me. During exam season I had something on all day. I wasn't able to work during the day, so that evening I cycled to the library at about 10 p.m. On the way there, I came across a man just lying on the floor. He had slipped on a patch of ice and cracked his head open on the pavement. What really fucked with me was that first he told me that he was lying there for 20 minutes before I found him, and 2 people have just cycled past him and ignored his cries for help. Who does that? He had actually cracked his head open and also broken his neck. Who knows what would have happened to him if I hadn't come along. Some fucking people. What was even worse was the ambulance took 2 hours to get there, despite us being less than a kilometer away from the hospital itself. Towards the end of the 2-hour wait, he kept forgetting what had happened to him, so I had to remind him. It was just fucking horrible. A pregnant woman is completely wasted. I was a cocktail waitress, and I had been serving her all night, not knowing she was pregnant. Her clothes were loose and she was sitting. Well, she got way too drunk, and I told the bar owner, who told me to tell her she was cut off. So she stood up and tried to take a swing at me. I threw my hands up to protect my face and clumsily dodged her hand, so she stumbled and almost fell. I went to the bouncer and claimed I tried to hit her and I should be arrested because she was 4 months pregnant and I could have killed her baby. No one knew she was pregnant at all because she didn't show through her clothes. She could have been lying, and I really hope she was, because when I say she was wasted, I'm not joking. I've relayed this story before, but I feel it's fitting. On the train going into the city, the train slows down to where you can clearly see what's going on outside. Train passes park when I glance out the window and witness 2 teenaged kids in the bushes by the fence over the road from the train tracks. I see the boy inject himself, pull out the needle, and then place the syringe into the girl's arm. I remember him pulling the needle out really fast. He leant over to the girl and said something, and that was it. The train began to move again. I doubt anyone else witnessed this because there were no other reactions of utter fear and sadness for the kids. I still think of them to this day. I hope they are okay. I was working at a frozen yogurt store and a very elderly couple caked in one afternoon. I'm talking 90 plus easily. They each ordered their respective cups of yogurt to go and walked out of the store. On the way out, the elderly woman trips on the threshold of the door, which, to be fair, was strangely high up, and bashes her skull on the sidewalk out front. I immediately rush to go help her, and she has a welt on the top of her head the size of a golf ball. The husband is strangely calm this whole time, all the while I'm freaking the fuck out. I try to go get some ice for her, but strangely we don't have any, so I ran next door to get some. I come back with a rag full of ice and ask if she's okay. She looks at me and says, "I think so." As she says, this is a fucking stream of blood jets out of her forehead, and I immediately insist on calling the police. The husband demands that I don't. In my adrenaline-induced panic, I somehow rationalize that I wasn't legally allowed to call an ambulance because someone told me not to. I'm an idiot. Anyway, all the while the husband is just lucidly munching down on his vanilla froyo. After about 3 minutes and an inordinate amount of blood spurting everywhere, they got in their car and left. I have absolutely no idea if she survived, but my guess is that she didn't. While I was deployed to Afghanistan, I wound up doing some work at one of the truck depots near the Pakistani border. We were out in the yard one day while the trucks were filling in and the truckers were taking a break, talking to one another, getting food, etc. There were these kids, boys between 10 and 12, who would usually accompany the adult drivers, and you knew that they were the pleasure boys. And while we're working, every now and then you'd see the truckers go and call their boy back to their cab, and you knew what was going on. It's really easy when you're back in the States to say that you'd never let that kind of thing happen. It's really easy until you're in a situation where there's only a few of you and a few hundred of them, and it's ingrained in their culture, and holy SHT, there was a green on blue a few weeks ago because someone tried to stop that shit happening on base and the Anna gunned him down, and that was on base. So you wind up just trying to do your fucking job and get the hell out of there and go the hell home and not let it happen in your backyard. It's been 6 years, and I still remember the faces on those kids and the kind of beaten down, dejected way they'd roam around. I don't glorify culture acceptance anymore. The world can be a shitty place. Edit. So, I should probably clarify that I don't consider the pedophilia thing to be an issue of Islam so much as an issue of Afghanistan, Pashtunwali, tribal culture, and just the whole messed up situation in that region. The worst thing I saw happened when my sister and I were at a babysitter's house. We had been playing in the sprinklers/inflatable pool all morning. I went back inside, and then I heard the screaming and shouts. My sister sat on a firework that an idiot neighbor teen had been playing with. He threw it over the fence, and since she was around 3 years old, she didn't see it in the toy car. Her butt was severely burned, probably 2nd degree. I remember seeing the blood and skin peeling, and then the paramedics came, and there was even more screaming from my sister. To this day, I do not play with fireworks. My dad tried to get me to touch them again when I was 11. I ended up sobbing in a corner and screaming at him. My sister, on the other hand, is fine with them. There was a faint but terrible smell coming from a huge ceramic urn outside my bedroom window. I went out to investigate and noticed that it was full of water and that there was a weird gray scum on top. I got a stick and stuck it in to see what was in there. Piercing the surface with the stick was like popping a bubble of the worst stench imaginable. It was then that I realized that the scum was made up of hair. The water was a rotting pink color, and there was something solid just below the surface. I wedged the stick under it and lifted the now completely hairless and translucent corpse of a gigantic rat out of the water. I could see its organs through the skin. That was when the full force of the smell hit me and I retched. I dropped the rat and the stick back into the urn and wiggled the thing over to the back of our property where there was a drop down to a stream, and I pitched the whole lot over and fled before the smell got me again. It's not human corpses or a horrific accident, but that smell, it was fucking vile. I used to work at an airport, and there were tons of dangerous practices. We submitted paper after paper to management everywhere up the line, but nothing was done about it. Then a union came in and helped us push harder, even though legally we couldn't unionize. Still nothing happened. A bunch of people wanted to strike. I talked every single one of them down because I wanted to try being more respectful and not use brute force like that. We had also signed agreements saying we wouldn't strike, and according to federal law, striking wouldn't be legal. Then one day a guy I didn't really know who worked with me took a corner towards a plane. There weren't enough people for someone to stand there to let others know the engine was live, and there was no seatbelt, hood, sides, or doors on the vehicle he was driving. He went to go past, got knocked off, hit his head on the ground, and died instantly. The next day they were implementing the safety issues we'd brought up years ago. If we had struck, we could have shut down the airport and forced them to listen, but because of me, we didn't. The worst part? This happened in 2012. It's not ancient history, and the smell of jet fuel still makes me sick to my stomach. I used to attend autopsies and suspicious death scenes for my job. In smaller cities, less than 50K, prosecutors are also coroners. A family of 5 after their minivan wrecked. Driving too fast in the snow. Dad had been drinking. Pregnant mom, teenage daughter, baby all dead. Twin sons rushed to the hospital. Dad survived with little injury. The floor of the van was an inch deep in blood, and there was a bushkin floating in it. The kid sticks with me, he had been sitting in his sister's lap. He looked as if he had been thrown against a wall at 55 miles per hour several times. I attended the pregnant mother's autopsy. The baby was 4 months old. 2 teenagers who had both suicided by hanging themselves in the woods. It took more than a week to find them, and they were in bad shape. I knew one of them because I had cut him a break on a previous crime. The uncle found them. It turns out they were running meth for the Chinese gangs. Pretty sure it was murder. But I couldn't prove anything. The autopsy on this obese man. Another gang hit, his legs had been broken with a heavy metal object, he had been ran over by a car, his throat was then slit, which was the COD, and his body was beaten post-mortem. This was after significant torture pre-death. They had ripped his fingernails out with pliers, cut his ear off, and burned him with cigarettes, among other indignities. So a suspicious death. In the autopsy, all of his organs were covered with a thick yellow layer of fat. Including his testicles. It really inspired me to get healthy. Happened when I was in 2nd grade, first week of school. Also, was a country where kids are not under large amounts of supervision. If you screw up, it's on you. Stuff like taking public transportation when you're 8 to get to school is acceptable. In any case, the school was on a hill. Off to the side of the school was a tiny park and a large stone wall along the border. On the other side, a two-story drop, could have been less, I was tiny at the time. Me and this kid I met the day before found a way to scale it. Some random girl is next to us, saying we should not be up there. The next moment is kind of a blur, I'm not sure what happened exactly, but the kid is soaring through the air and landing fucking face first on a paved road. Everything stops. A blood puddle grows. An elderly couple are running up to the kid, lifting him up, prob. Should not have moved him, and sitting him on a bench across the road, facing me. He is alive, hailing. His face is smashed, nose, forehead, blood streaks. His leg is twisted in the wrong direction. His hand looks like he got another joint between the wrist and the elbow. Ambulance is on the way. Teachers are pouring out of the school. The random girl who was next to us is shouting I pushed him. I don't know why, and I didn't. I can still recall that scene. Anyways, the kid was fine and came back a few days later with casts. After that, we became best friends for like 4 years. We hung out every day and found out we lived 2 blocks away from one another. We even ended up taking karate class together. 4 years later, he climbed that wall, fell again, and actually died this time. Sorry, I actually just moved away and lost touch. The internet was 2 years away. Was the first on scene to a car accident. A couple friends and I had just gotten back to one of their houses after a movie. As we got out of the car and were walking to the front door, we heard this huge crash. I'm not certain, but I could have sworn I felt it shake the ground. After hearing the noise, I booked it up the street where I assumed the crash occurred. And there it was. A car had gone through a brick wall and almost into a house. There were twisted arms dangling out of the windows, and the part that was eerie was that there were no noises. I called 911 immediately. They were asking me questions about what type of wall it was, how close the wall was to the house, etc., and of course I was so panicked that I didn't know how to answer those questions. Emergency services came, and one of the officers asked if I could stay and help him with details. So, I got to watch the whole process, from the firemen using the jaws of life to the victims being hauled away in ambulances and all that. One of the victims must have gained consciousness because they started screaming, not really screams, just very loudly asking questions, while they were being put in the ambulance. Definitely something I'll always remember. I was in St. Petersburg late at night trying to figure out how to get back to my hotel. I was walking along the river, heading south towards the Nevsky district, when I heard a group of people on the other side arguing with a guy who had been stripped naked except for his briefs. I couldn't make out exact details of their faces or anything because it was 3 a.m. and my eyesight was poor. I didn't want to draw any attention to myself being there, so I kept my head down and kept walking. There was a clear splash a few seconds later, and I saw this guy thrashing in the water but not making any noise. It was 25°C that night, I believe, and there is no way anybody could last more than a minute or two in that kind of temperature. I crossed the street and got as far away from that mess as I could into a more residential area. Lucky for me, a taxi drove past that I hailed in and got back to my hotel in safety. I think about that guy every day, but there was nothing I could have done to help. I had been kidnapped by the mafia the day previous for insulting their choice of drinks, driven around by them in a car with some rough-looking lads, and threatened with guns and knives. They extorted me for over €2,000, which is why I knew there was nothing I could do. The whole event has made me super cautious and jumpy since I don't know what that man did to deserve such a fate, but hopefully it wasn't as trivial as my experience. Something I witnessed that completely horrified me. Let's see. Here's the setting. I was an 8-year-old boy with 6 other people in a sedan. Was heading to Bahawalpur, Pakistan, from Karachi. A few hours of driving. We had a driver. I remember this traumatizing experience like this. We were just outside the city, a few minutes out, going to visit family with my mom, dad, sister, my mother's sister, and her 4-year-old child. My dad gets a text from a family member. Benazir Bhutto has been assassinated, and that's when shit hits the fan. As we get closer, it's more visible to see the city has an orange glow over it, and gunshots and yelling can be heard. The driver starts to panic, and my dad makes him stop the car to switch places. Now he is driving in full fuck this shit I'm out mode and floors the car in whatever way a mob wasn't collecting in. And by mob, I mean full out torches and rifles and overturning cars kind of mob. He calls up one of his army friends and manages to get us a spot in the only safe place in the city. It was called Defense, basically a military base. We managed to get in and got a little room where we stayed for 3 to 4 days. Those days were a blur, all I remember is the constant smell of burning and the sound of explosions and gunshots. Hell, my dad made a game out of it to keep me and my sister distracted. It involved trying to name the weapon firing the round. Fast forward to us leaving in a military convoy, consisting of 2 armored jeeps with mounted HMGs, 3 of those barrack trucks carrying armed troops, and another 2 vans transporting another bunch of families trying to get out of the city. The journey back was slow and terrifying. The convoy moved at a slow and constant pace as it had to constantly weave in and out of burning wreckages of trucks, cars, vans, and carcasses. To an 8-year-old boy, this was the most horrifying thing. A few months later, back at home, I hear an earth-shaking noise. Run up to the roof to see the Marriott Hotel off in the distance and go up in smoke. It had just been truck bombed. I've seen some shit, and people don't believe me when I tell them I've gotten used to the sounds of explosions and gunshots. They probably get the wrong idea. I was traveling in India for a few months, and there were families of monkeys that would hang out outside our window every day. They were really cute. Lots of the moms carry little baby monkeys on their underside. Anyway, this one time one of the moms was carrying her baby, but it had obviously died. But she was still carrying it around. The group of monkeys stopped and were trying to take the dead baby monkey off the mom, but the mom wouldn't let it go. The male monkey, possibly the dad, then came up and grabbed it from the mom and threw the body a few meters away. The dad and the rest of them all started continuing on their way. But the mom came back to where the baby was lying and just sat there, poking it, and looking so devastated. Then a couple of the other females came and put their arms around the mom, consoling her. Eventually she left the baby and walked off with the others. It was so human. I saw tons of messed up stuff in India, poverty, homelessness, disease, dead bodies, etc., but for some reason this horrified me in a totally different way. In high school, sometime in the winter months around December/January, I was startled awake in the middle of the night by doors slamming, people running from room to room, and the agonized screams of a young man in our living room. Initially I sat up in bed, my heart was racing. I was unsure if someone had just broken in or who was out there screaming. I hear people run to the bathroom just outside my bedroom door, my mother and a man crying and wailing in pain. I open my bedroom door, and standing in front of me is the bloodied body of a longtime friend's son. He's only about 28 at the time. His stomach is torn open, and I can see more than I should of his insides. It looks like Wolverine sliced into him, and the skin was just sort of hanging over the wounds. I only had a moment to stare in shock before my mom pushes me back into my room and tells me to wait in there for her and not to come out. I sit down in the dark trying to make sense of what the hell is going on outside my door. All I can hear is this guy that I kind of know wail over and over, "I killed her. I fucking killed her." My mom is trying to patch him up and keep him lucid, asking him, "What happened? Do you know where you are?" And the man just kept screaming back, "She's dead, oh my god. She's fucking dead, and I killed her, I killed my girlfriend. I loved her." My mom tried to clarify if he knew she was dead, but he told her the best he could as he sobbed that he could tell she was gone. After that, my mom came back and tried explaining to me that he had been drunk driving and speeding when he hit a patch of ice turning a corner, and his attempts to correct flipped their car multiple times. The story I got was that he left the scene of the accident on foot, got picked up, and someone stranger dropped him off near our place because his dad lived with us at the time and he didn't know where else to go, just that he was going to jail and his girlfriend was most likely dead. She said they drove down and checked on the accident and that rescue crews were still trying to pull her out of the car with the jaws of life. She told me I wasn't allowed to talk about what I'd seen that night to anyone, ever, and so I didn't, save for my best friend. He was on the run for a while, from what I heard, but I guess he eventually turned himself in. I have no idea what's happened to him since jail or if he's still incarcerated. Living through a real-life drunk driving PSA was certainly a vivid deterrent to drinking and driving myself. I now tell the people I meet who make excuses for driving under the influence this story in the hopes that it'll give them pause next time. Nothing will ever erase what it was like to witness someone's realization that they just simultaneously took the life of someone they loved and destroyed their own future in the process. When I was 4, I witnessed my grandmother get horribly burned. It was Father's Day, and she was lighting a charcoal grill. I guess there was a buildup of fumes from the lighter fluid, and a gas ball came back and burned her from her neck down to mid-waist. I was standing in the laundry room watching her light this fire. I'll never forget the smoke and the screams. After that, I remember everything in flashes. My dad, grandpa, and uncle are running outside. Her being brought inside. Her standing in the dining room with a dusty rose-colored towel draped over her shoulders. Her bra melted to her body. There was no shirt left on her that I can remember. There was a debate about the best way to get her to the hospital as they lived, and still do, they farm, in a rural area with no 911 access. It was a good year before she got to come home. She's a tough old broad. She relearned how to play the piano. She still grills. She just is hard to get into a picture. She's a beautiful woman now, in spite of the scars. I need to go over and give my grandma a hug. I had to shoot a kitten that I raised by hand. I raised it from when it was first born. The mother refused to feed it, so I took it on. I woke up every few hours to feed it and bonded with it. It was my buddy. It was about 9 weeks old and would always follow me around on our little farm. I woke up one night to the dog outside barking. He only barked when shit was going down, so I ran outside. I see where he is looking, and it's the barn. I hear chickens going crazy. I run inside and see my kitten being attacked by 20 chickens. I go in and save it, but only from any more damage. Its eye was ripped apart, paw hanging on by sinew, and when I pick it up, I can feel that its insides are ruptured. The nearest vet is an hour away, and my buddy is fading. I take it outside and set it down on the ground, petting it. It looks up at me, its mouth open. It's trying to scream but can't. So I do the hardest thing I have ever had to do in my life. I run inside, grab my gun, and go back out. I give it one more pat on the head, wipe my eyes, and put a bullet in its head. I stood there for a minute, dazed. I drop my gun, walk out into a cornfield, sit down, and just start crying. I was 17 at the time. I will never forget it. In my heart, I know I did the right thing. Some people I have told this to told me I was a monster, but fuck that. It was going to die, and in the most painful way possible. I put an end to it. Still miss him. Edit, I owe you guys my gratitude. I almost didn't post this, and when I did, I braced myself for the insults. But you guys did the exact opposite. I always knew I made the right call, but damn if it doesn't make me feel better knowing that most people think I made the right call. Thanks for helping lift that weight. Cheers.